Okay, so we're going to do a quick video, and this one's going to be basically on saws. So we've done kind of a belt knife, working knife, axes, and obviously saws. So saws, a pretty effective tool. It's a great secondary tool if you've got an axe or a machete or knife. The saw can be, make us pretty effective as a secondary tool. And I consider it more of a secondary tool in the respect of making a fire, doing those, fine shavings or feather sticks, that type of thing. Having said that, playing with them, you probably could get enough sawdust, that type of thing. And it may strike a ferro rod depending on the blade shape. But I consider it for the most part a secondary tool. If I'm want to mark trees as I'm moving through something like that, saw is probably not my most effective. Splitting wood to get into the dry, you're gonna have to do a lot of work if it's really effective at that. But an awesome secondary tool for sure, especially going after a little bit bigger stuff. And it's a great tool to have with us. Definitely camping, that type of thing as well. So just kind of an intro there. So we're going to touch a few different types and kind of strengths, weaknesses. And, so first and foremost, we'll start with just more of architecture of the saw. And we'll start with a common, this is a bow saw. Lots of different types. This is, a pretty standard one out of, most hardware stores. So it's blade design. Can cut both on the push as well as a draw. Because it's somewhat stabilized and it's got tension on it, it makes it a little bit, so we can do a, cut on the push and pull, and also probably makes it a little bit more stable. We can bend the blades, but they're harder to break unless we're really hard on them. So it's got the advantage of, probably, stabilizing that blade a little bit better. So that's the first one, kind of a bow saw. The next obvious ones that we're kind of used to seeing are the folding saws, and this is obviously a bigger one. More compact. From that respect, to put in a pack. Some of them, and we'll go through the, the blade designs and stuff like that, but it can be very effective cutting. For the most part, these are going to cut on the draw. If, some of the risk with these is when we push on it, if we bend the blade too much, or we can snap the blade. So it's not stabilized like a more of a bow saw. But compact and can be very effective depending on the blade design on a draw. So just to we're going to touch a few, and there's obviously on the table, there's a whole bunch of different sizes, shapes, and we'll go through that in a bit. So bow versus maybe a folding saw. There's some T-handled saws that work into that, more of a draw, but very effective, in their place. Over the years, we'll kind of touch on some of the folding. So this is kind of out of your hardware store. May not be your choice for a backpack or hiking, that type of thing. So we'll kind of move that to the side. But over the years, there's been compact ones. So this all fits into this one handle. So it all comes apart. Will pop into the handle, and it's, this one was around. There was a few of these around, so things we want to focus on in some of these are, this isn't a full, maybe a full length bow saw, a little bit shorter. Its advantage, versus, and I'm going to use this one, which is more of a triangle folding saw again, but a longer blade. I'm not sure if you can see that there. So the blade's a little bit longer with this version. And you can get the longer blade versions of these as well. Its difference is depending on the round that I'm trying to cut, as I'm getting through, some things to keep in mind is as I'm trying to get down to the farther end, I'm going to be limited to my length of my stroke, so I may not be able to get the full advantage of the full length of this blade with some of these types. But if I'm managing smaller wood, it's definitely an option, and they were pretty effective in some respects. So this one's more of a parallel. My length of, or my depth of cut is probably a little bit longer, even though it's a shorter blade, just because I'm not running into the bar up here. And as well, I get almost the full length of that saw blade, which makes us more effective. So things to keep in mind. I'm just touching some of the saws over the years. This one was a fairly common one. Same idea. It's pretty small. Everything folds around and folds into the handle, so it's fairly compact. It was pretty light in its day. And the same thing, it allows me depth of cut, on something bigger, and more of a full stroke on my on my wood I'm procuring. Again, this was prior to, I guess Colligan's makes them now. They call them, I think it was water saw or something like that. Very quick to unfold, pretty efficient saw, and just keep in mind with any of the triangle saws, depth. We're not gonna be able to fully utilize that whole blade necessarily, depending on the size of the wood we're trying to procure. So as we're moving, we may have limited to almost half when we get into some bigger stuff. So things to keep in mind. So that being said, that's kind of more on the bow saws, or that type of thing. What's the advantage, disadvantage? Well, if they're held tight, this blade can work on both the push and pull, as well as, because there's tension on there, they tend not to break as easy as some of the folding saws, and we'll get into that. So now we're going to touch more or less kind of a folding saw idea. And the advantage, obviously, with the folding saws, and as we can see on the table here, there's quite a variety. Pretty compact, something that, in this case, this one actually fits on my belt, and I keep it in a sheath with one of my belt knives. So it's a great secondary tool for sure. The advantage to it is it's a lot of times they're fairly small and compact, and they're quick to deploy. So whereas some of these other ones, some of these bow saws, even putting together for this video, right, I'm dropping screws or trying to get it all to fit together gently, and some work a little bit better than others, but deploying it is something I really have to think about in the field, unless I'm in my camp and set up. So if I'm walking along and want to clear some branches or something like that, it's probably not something I'm going to deploy easily. So I'll probably choose to use maybe a knife, or in this case, this folding saw's advantage is it definitely is quick to deploy. I can use it, put it away, and I'm not dropping screws and different things, or risking, having pieces going missing. So and not to say that it's just a different place. So so having said that, there's a huge variety. This is maybe one of the smaller ones, but not truly the smallest one. So one of the kits that I just kind of put together, it's got an emergency blanket, or a reflective blanket, first aid, small steel, and a small little neck knife, as well as it's got a small folding saw. And these are fairly cheap. This one's actually pretty effective for a little saw. So I just, they can get pretty small, right? As in the same thing, right? We can have on our a lot of our folding knives, the Swiss Army knife, that type of thing, has fairly effective saw on it as well, right? So, but we'll kind of keep that aside. So they come in obviously a variety of sizes, all from the smaller ones up to, this is a Game Boy or Katana 650 if I'm not mistaken. So fairly big, pretty aggressive blade. So easy deployment, fairly effective on the draw. They can be very effective. Some of the risks, what's the downside? Well, I can tell you, this is a Fiskars. This is the second or third one. I don't think I've made it through, and if I'm using something this size, it's going to be for bigger stuff. But it was probably 5-6 inches. I don't know if I've made it through a whole log without the blade snapping. Having said that, that's this one type, and I've actually, because I didn't learn it the first time, I went and tried it a second time. So this one is actually a silky, which and are great saws, but things to keep in mind is the risk is if they get jammed or if we push too hard, a lot of the blades will bend or snap for sure. So I've had actually probably 2 or 3 silky blades snap on me as well. And a lot of times if I'm in a camp and I lend it out or somebody grabs a saw and they're not really aware of it, that's usually where we can snap the blades if they're a little bit harder on them. So that's kind of the downside, is the blade isn't being held like a bow saw, is sturdy. So we have to be cognizant on our push, because it usually they cut on the pull. There's some examples of, and we'll try some in some videos outside and just give you an idea on some of the designs. And actually, this is the Baco, and this is a fairly standard one, the Laplander, I guess, and pretty sturdy blade. So not too often that I've seen these fractured or broken. Maybe not as aggressive as a tooth design, and we'll get into that in a minute, as some of these other ones, but a little bit more sturdy and a fairly cost-effective little package. May not be as efficient as some of the other ones. This is a Laplander, and I actually just upgraded the blade. It has, so it's a little bit more aggressive tooth design, but again, it becomes a little bit thinner. So I haven't had a problem with this blade, but I haven't used it as much as some of the other ones. So it's always a risk with a folding saw. So next up, we're going to touch on some of the aspects of some of these saws, and a lot of these are going to fall into, and I'll try and give you some examples here of, it's so many teeth per inch a lot of times, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples of, so this being the Baco and the Silky. I don't know if you can see that, but finer teeth here, little thicker blade. This is the small Silky, pretty aggressive teeth, and we can get different. I'll try and find an example here, and I'll try and find another example. So, in different blades, we can get different blades with a lot of these. So, it's going to be measured for the most part in how many teeth per inch are on this blade. So if I look at this one, if I can see it, this one runs into 6.5 teeth per inch, and this one is 10 teeth per inch. So finer, right? Might do, it may not cut as deeply on each draw stroke, but less effort in some respects. So if I was doing pruning on small branches, I might want to go with more teeth per inch, so I'm not catching and snagging the branches. But if I'm doing bigger wood, I probably prefer to have a more aggressive tooth design, which will give us fewer teeth per inch, but definitely larger teeth. So that's one part, is teeth per inch we can look at. So as much as when we're looking at the teeth per inch, the blade design itself, and there's two ways of doing this, the bottom of the cutting edge here should be a little bit thicker, and some of these blades narrow as they get to the top of the spine. And the reason for that is so it doesn't bind when we're cutting into the wood. There's no friction, and it's not going to bind on us as easy. So that makes it an effective cutting blade if that's done properly. Some are beveled. Some definitely will use a different tooth design where the teeth, and this might be an example, this is probably a better example, where it's not so much maybe the bevel on this, but the teeth are actually angled out a bit on each side, so they cut a little bit more width that allows the blade to slide through as we're cutting and not get hung up or stuck in the wood. So that's also, and that also will apply to a bow saw teeth design, and it's really hard to see here, but the teeth, every second tooth may vary on each side, so it doesn't bind as easy on the blade. So there will be, and I have had the odd blades when I really look at them and they're really sticky, that there was maybe a poor design of that. I'm going to touch quickly. So all these saws here, and I'm not going to get into other than the ones that I've broken and haven't quite got through a full piece of wood breaking those. You know, there's price points. So definitely this is on the lower end price point, but I've got a few friends that have used these a lot, and I'm going to say surprisingly, and this is Coughlin's. You know, the handles are definitely cheaper design, right? Nothing fancy about it. One of the things I will say about the blades, though, is, and I've got two people that used it substantially and over months, and when I say hundreds of trees, we're cutting paths through, and you know, probably way over 200-300 trees that were cut, and not always big ones, but a lot of little ones. The surprising part to this was that with this saw in itself, and I think a lot of these are arc tempered, so they're probably not easy to sharpen, number one, but this one model we didn't have to sharpen the blade. It actually was it stayed probably one of the better ones. It stayed very sharp even with the amount of use. Oddly too, this one, you know, the blades bent a bit, and over the, you know, I've got a Silky here. This was actually one of the ones she started with, and this one broke, and it got jammed in the wood. So different designs. You know, I'm just going to touch a few of these. These ones, even though they're cost effective, you know, the handles, you know, cheap for sure, right? But I leave this one in one of my kits in the car, one of my grab bags. It's just, it doesn't bring tears if it gets pinched or if I lost it, but it's a pretty effective saw. The Silkies I do like. The one thing I will find is they won't bend maybe quite as much, and I don't know if that's tempering. The blades are definitely good blades, tempering, but maybe throughout the blade, or it's a little bit thicker. So I do find I have broken a few Silkies, but that's usually if I lend it to somebody or if I get overzealous. So things to keep in mind. The Baco definitely is, or the Laplander, I guess, right? The upgraded, you know, I changed the blade on it, pretty more or much more aggressive blade. Haven't used it enough to honestly, you know, make a good determination on that. But by far, Silkies are the, you know, pretty common, you know, in all different sizes, right? So as you can see here, you know, we've got different lengths. This is probably one of the more effective ones from a folding saw, and just because we get a length of draw, we can go after some bigger wood, and you know, it's been a good saw. To go on the other end, and when we talk about teeth per inch, and this is getting into basically a two-handed saw, but that's 4 teeth per inch. Great saws if I'm going after bigger timber. On small stuff, this will snag and just an exercise in frustration sometimes. The other thing to keep in with both of these are fairly big. They're two-handed saws, as much as sometimes we end up trying to get into where we're trying to use it with one hand. Your wood has to be held solid. So if it's moving it without a second person to hold it, these saws aren't going to be effective on definitely smaller stuff, but on big stuff they're definitely very, very effective. So keep in mind, if we get too big, I wouldn't go beyond this for a one-handed saw. I can use two hands on it. As soon as I get up into this one, I think this is a 450. I really, to use it properly, I need to use two hands. I'll get away sometimes, one-handing it, but the teeth are so aggressive, they'll also grab the wood. And so if it's not solid, if it's a growth that's half out, a deadfall that's solid, that I can get a good draw on it, works great. So very effective if I'm going after bigger timber, that type of thing, right? So keep that in mind. There's tons of varieties of saws. I would on any saw, I would definitely look at reviews on them and people that have used them, just to kind of get that feedback if it's something new. The Silkies are pretty well known, definitely well known. Laplanders, definitely a pretty common saw and pretty robust. And then I can go into some of the other ones that are kind of hit and misses at times, right? And different designs over the years. Some of the Gerbers, the Fiskars, I can't speak to the small one. I can speak to the big one though. The Gerbers, which are probably done by Fiskars, I've actually had a couple of the older ones that weren't bad. So, but sticking to more of the standard stuff that's out there. So, having said all that, the other ones are, and this is more of a, some of the hunting in the bone saws. In this case, this one's actually got a wood saw as well that you could use for that. Another option. Again, right, the blade design and flexibility of the blade versus the tempering are always things to consider. So we're going to try and I'm going to try and give you some. We'll cut into some clips and we'll do a little bit of testing, just give you an idea of the effectiveness of these different saws. Just to kind of a quick review. Definitely the folding saws, easy to deploy, very effective. A lot of the designs, they're actually for a little saw very effective. The bow saws, whatever type you choose, allows you to push and to cut on the push and the pull depending on the blade design. Probably a little bit more sturdy because it's held tighter. So I've twisted blades. For the most part, most of the broken blades have been on the folding ones. But putting this together, deploying it, it's a decision that I put it together in camp. If I'm moving along a trail, it's just a little bit different. There are some that are quicker to deploy for sure. And I'll give you an example. And this is kind of the older version. Colgan's makes this. It's a fairly cost-effective saw again. They actually, for a triangle saw, this is probably the quickest deploying saw and one of my favorites. As long as you get a decent blade on it. The blade folds into it, handle collapses, and it deploys fairly quick for a folding saw. It's probably the quickest. And this one, this was the original design before Colgan's picked it up, I guess. So this one I used to try and do this without dropping it. Used to fit in my machete sheath. So basically, if it was in a pack, so I had the saw tied to the machete, it was a pretty effective package, right? So saws are a great secondary tool for sure. It's just understand limitations and with these ones. Be sure if you're lending it to somebody, if it's one that may have a little bit more of a brittle blade, that just walk through with them. They got to be gentle on the push and it cuts on the draw. So we'll cut into some clips, and we'll take it from there. So this is kind of the size of the log that this one definitely should have an advantage, right? And,
yeah.
The bigger one, the medium size. So if you look over here,
that's
so you want to, where this one can live, definitely if you're into the bigger wood, right?
Yeah.
Bigger growth, this would be a good choice now.
Oh yeah, okay.
So this, obviously, this is, going to be too big. Is there a way to work around it? If you can get around it, yeah, maybe for sure to break it.
Yeah.
But that's just your limit, right? Is, how far can I go? Now, my blade doesn't move that far. If it's a smaller piece, right, I get much more,
Yeah.
But when we get down to something like this,
you're not even moving it.
Yeah, you're not going to span it, right? Or,
yeah.
From a depth side. So, and that's where even that orange one, not the big one, you could get through this with that saw.
Yeah.
Right, and even some of the smaller ones you could work around maybe a bit, but
yeah,
so keep that in mind too, right? This is solid, so that big one, we don't have to hold it, right? And
no,
you get and
that's
two
right.
hands and a good stroke on it, so it's pretty effective.
Yeah.
For stuff like this, right? So the one thing with the Baco's Laplander, so one of these, the nice things, these aren't real expensive. They actually lock closed, so if I throw it in my pack, right, that's one less thing to worry about, rather than usually I wrap mine depending on where they are, make sure they're stuffed properly.
Yeah.
So we're going to try the standard one, right, which is some finer teeth, and we're going to go through, this is probably a good 2 inches ish, and so we'll use those two, and we'll throw the Coglins in there and a Silky maybe.
Okay.
Right, so I'll start with this one.
Okay.
And that's probably not going to stay there. A little bit closer in there. So that's a little bit rotten there, but not bad, right?
Nope.
This one a little bit less rot. Definitely more aggressive.
Yeah.
You notice that. Silky. This is 10 per inch. Actually, I'm going to use a small one. Right on my go. So a little bit smaller, but more aggressive teeth again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that went through.
Coglins, Coglins, right? Is that right?
Coglins, yeah.
Coglins, yeah. So. Pretty effective little saw,
yeah,
right? I mean,
it is.
all of these, to be honest, I wouldn't have a problem. This is the one I leave in my pack in the car. Just, it's cost effective, but it is, they've proven the blades haven't snapped, they've bent a bit.
Yeah.
Not that they wouldn't snap, and the teeth, haven't, whether it's arc tempering, so high temper arcing, right, to get the tempering on it.
Yeah.
They've been pretty effective. So whoever makes them has done a good job of those, and a little bit thinner blade.
Yeah.
So it probably makes
Let me try this.
Yeah. Show off. Okay, try another one.
So actually the Coglan's was,
A little quicker.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of, if we get into some harder wood, that'll tell the truth. But for the smallest one, I mean, they're effective, right, as a secondary tool. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, that and a belt knife. We could split this up. We could get into the inside pretty quick. Shelters. Let's try it on some smaller stuff here and just see how that does. So, and this is where, so this has got finer teeth.
Okay.
The smaller stuff, the larger, teeth per inch. So when we get down to the 4, it's just gonna snag and bounce all over. So if we're doing smaller stuff, it doesn't bounce around. It's pretty quick. So we'll try something a little bit more aggressive. Try this one. So, a little bit more aggressive. A bit stickier, but it went quick. Right?
Yep.
That's where Calkins in there. This is fair, but more aggressive teeth, right?
Yeah.
The vibration and everything as we get into this, I don't know if it, it's where the bigger piece is just going to be a bit of an exercise in frustration. I think this one, just because of what we'll see. Right? So we just got to be a little bit careful starting it. And this is
the challenge.
Yeah, so just nice and light.
Yeah.
So it sticks, but it's effective, right? It's just you got to be a little more careful with this one bouncing.
Yeah.
Onto. So just make it from a width side.
Yeah.
We might have to bust it off a bit. This one, we'll make it, but it's going to have a pretty limited draw.
Yeah.
And this one is where the advantage of the folding saws.
Yeah.
So.
Again.
Yeah, good. You put your hand, you may be able to one there and one there, and see if without breaking your knuckles. But that you're not pushing. If you push down on it, it tends to bounce sometimes.
Okay.
Right?
Running out of room.
And that's the challenge there is to get such a short stroke here, right?
Yeah. So yeah, lots of work, right? Yeah, and definitely ran out of room.
Yeah, that's where it's the inefficiency of the
triangle.
triangle. Yeah.
But yeah, having your hands,
But,
except
I mean,
you do smack your knuckles.
Yeah, yeah, and if that's what you got, I mean, it's probably good close to 5 inches, right? So
yeah,
and you can get through it, right? So We'll try your most favorite one.
My most favorite one.
Take a break from that. Let's see those ninja saw skills. There we go. So that's pretty effective.
Yes,
And
very.
you know what? And you had a full draw all the way to the bottom, right? You're not restricted, so you get to utilize the blade fully. Right? Okay, now just for fun, I'm going to try the smallest one. I'll just see. You know what? Sometimes you can work around it and make it work, right? So
Good, because I need a break.
I'll swap you. Saves fingers if it jumps. So this is going to be pushing this one's lock.
Yeah.
That's not quite right.
So if this is all you have.
But what I'm going to do is work from the other side. And by this I'm cutting up, so even though the blade doesn't get the full span, it's now, so when I work it from the other side again.
Yeah.
There, so
Yeah.
you know, you can make it work if that's all you have, right?
Yeah.
And you know, if I'm doing, you know, like we said, talk about in the winter long fires, I'm limbing it usually with my knife.
Yeah.
Could I limb it with a saw? It'd take me a long time, right? But
Yes,
pretty
that's
effective
right. Yeah.
if I've got a knife. And,
Yeah.
But if that's all you got, right? And you know, so something like this, I might be making 2 cuts. You know, this is fairly long, and I'm going to drag it in for a long fire.
Yeah.
So just this would get me through, and burning this, you know, in a long fire, probably give me, you know, 2 to 4 hours, right? In cold temperatures where I gotta burn it hard. You know, it's just getting that long fire going. So really a few cuts, you know, living on that, right? If I had 3 or 4 of these, you know, I've got a good 12 hours. I'm very comfortable with that, right? So I'm not breaking it up into 1 foot lengths and splitting it, you know, which I might do in a wood stove or in the summer if I want to keep it contained, right? So, but no.
So with that, for a long fire though, do you need to keep adding smaller stuff to keep it burning, or does it...
So you want to put 2 of these side by side, and a lot of times, you know, we'll get it started on top before we throw the 3rd one on.
Yeah.
But I want a coal bed pretty tight, and I want this to start burn, a good burn, a good hot burn. And as we saw before, right, when I didn't let it I was a little bit overzealous and threw
Yeah.
the third one on too
Yeah.
quick.
Then
It smoked us out,
Yeah.
right? And we didn't get the coal bed that we needed. So start the coal bed, and then, you know, your long fire, you just, once you got that good coal bed, like we did the other night, we're just dragging them in,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
I drag, you know, one of these in or two of these in, and that's a couple hours. So we sleep for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, drag
Yeah.
another one in, we're good, right? So,
Yep.
so the bigger the wood, and obviously if it's nice and dry, right? So, no, so,
Yeah.
so that's a good, you know, good, kind of gives us an idea with, you know, Silkies, you know, the Laplanders, you know, the Coglins, right? Or Coglins, right?
Yeah.
You know, and some of the folding saws. They're all capable saws, and over the years I've used all of them, right?
Yeah.
The aluminum ones I've had to, you know, be somewhat careful, and but you know, the same thing with the other blades is snapping the blades, or having, you know, especially if you know, somebody that hasn't used them and going to be a little bit, doesn't know enough not to be so aggressive on the push.
Yeah.
That's where you're going to snap the blades. So instead of using my arm just like this, if I can get, you know, a good rhythm.
Oh, okay. Like.
Yeah, you just relax.
So rather than the speed and
Keep steady
use.
pace, right? And without, you know, you gotta watch. One thing you do have to watch is if this comes out or when it goes through, you know.
Okay, down
So
to
with
yeah.
the shorter one, I don't want to catch my knee or anything.
Yeah.
So not a ton of work on my arms,
Yeah.
but my body, and just a steady rhythm, right? And it can help assist. I don't have to not use my arms, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but just don't, something that if your body movement,
Yeah.
you know, is going to help, you know, why not? Right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So,
And the old adage, let the saw do the work,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Too
Yeah.
much, because that you just, you know, a lot more energy for really the
Yeah.
advantage that you're really not getting a whole lot more cutting out of it.
Yeah.